YouTube, what's going on? Wanye Films back with another tutorial. Today it's all about slow motion, how to achieve slow motion in your music videos or any video in general. Before I go any further, if you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I do tips, tricks, tutorials. Believe it or not, there is a right and wrong way to shoot and edit your slow motion videos. And I'm just gonna go over that and briefly touch on how to shoot and edit slow motion video. Alright, so to start it off, a lot of mistakes that I see up and coming videographers do is shoot in 24 frames per second and then try to slow that down when they get it into their editing software. That is a big no-no. You don't want to do that, and here's why. Shooting at 24 frames per second and bringing it into your editing software and slowing it down will create a choppy look that you're not going to want to use in your videos. If you ever find yourself shooting at 24 frames per second, I would recommend not slowing that down. You want to shoot anything over 24 frames per second. That's 30, 36, 60, 96, 120 frames per second. Depending on what camera you use will determine how many frames per second you can achieve in your videos. So to break it down even simpler, 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second seems to be my go-to. I'm either at 120 or 60. That's what my camera allows. There's no in between for me. So it goes 24 frames per second, 30, 60, 120. I believe the GH5, Panasonic Lumix GH5, there's 36 and 96 and 78. That one right there, I'm sure there's plenty others. Those seem to have the in-betweens, but I'm happy with the 60 frames per second and even 120 frames per second. It's just those other cameras, you are able to do that if that's what you want to do. With that being said, just keep in mind, I'm gonna keep drilling it. I'm just gonna keep drilling it into your mind until you get it. Do not slow down 24 frames per second video clips in your editing software because it will look choppy. Here's an example of that right here. Okay, so now you see why it's very crucial to shoot anything over 24 frames per second. So if you shoot in 30 frames per second and you bring it into your editing software and you conform it down to 24 frames per second, it will be a little bit slower, but not by much. For example, this is a clip right here. As you can see, I shot at 30 frames per second and then I slowed it down to 24 frames per second. And what makes this even more cool is when I shot the music video, in real time, we sped up the music. The artist right here, Zip Nasty, was actually performing fast, but when I slowed it down in the editing software, I was actually able to sync it up to the music. So even though it looks like it's in slow motion, it actually syncs up with the music. So that's a whole nother video. I will be touching on that in an up and coming video. I just wanted to show you you can shoot in 30 frames per second and then slow it down, and this is how slow it will look. But moving on to the 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, it will be a lot slower. Also, another side note, keep in mind, whatever frame rate you choose to shoot your video in, you're gonna want to double the shutter speed by whatever it is. So for instance, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, make sure that your shutter speed is at 1/48. But most cameras don't shoot at 1/48, so bring it to the closest number, which is 1/50th of a second, and you'll be set to go. Also, if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, double that to 120, but again, most cameras don't shoot at 120, so shoot at 125, and also so on for 120 frames per second. That is very crucial to know. Whatever you're shooting at, make sure that your shutter speed is double whatever that number is. All right, now quickly I'm going to show you how to slow it down in your video editing software. I'm going to be showing you off Adobe Premiere Pro. Don't know what you use, but pretty much it's same thing. Same thing goes for Final Cut Pro and whatever else you use. Just follow these main guidelines. Don't shoot in 24 frames per second if you plan on slowing your footage down, and shoot anything over 24 frames per second to conform it back down to 24 frames per second and give you that smooth, buttery look. Let's jump right in. All right, guys. Here you will see I have 2 clips selected in my editing software. That's Adobe Premiere. What I did is I went into my external hard drive and I imported 2 clips. One of them is 60 frames per second. That's this one right here. This clip was just shot for a recent music video that I did. You know, just some B-roll footage. I don't know if I'm going to use it or not, but this is shot in 60 frames per second. And then if you see over here, this one's shot in 120 frames per second. So I'm just going to go ahead and play each clip so you can see the difference when I do slow it down. But I'll start right here with the 60 frame per second clip. Just drag on over here, and you see this is what it looks like in real time. This right here is 60 frames per second. And what I'm going to do is just drag this on over to my timeline. And before I go any further with that, I'm just going to show you real quick the 120 frame per second. And this is what it looks like in real time. All right, so moving on over to the 60 frame per second clip. You know, one way to slow this down is to just right click, hit speed duration, and type in 40%. Then when you play it, you have a smooth, crisp, slow motion footage. All right, now let's say you try to slow this down even further to 20%, which I would not recommend. This is what your clip will now look like. You don't want that. Look how bad that looks. Choppy, just not the look you want to go for, trust me. And when I first started doing videos, I had no knowledge on this, and this was one of the main things that I was doing. So if I could save you from doing that, please listen to what I say. Don't go any further than 40% on a 60 frame per second clip. Bring it back to 40. There you go. That smooth look that you're looking for. All right, moving on to the next one, which was that 120 frame per second clip. Second way to do this, there's two ways you can slow it down. That was the first way. This is the second way. Go on over to your clip, right click, hit modify, interpret footage. You're gonna see use frame rate from file that I shot at 120 frames per second. But we're gonna hit assume this frame rate is 24 frames per second. Hit OK, drag it into your timeline. It's gonna say this clip does not match the sequence settings. That's because one of them is shot in 4K, the other one's shot in 1080p. We're gonna keep existing settings right there. And this is now what the footage is gonna look like when it's slowed down from 120 frames per second to 24 frames per second. All right, that's it. Look how crispy that looks. I like that. I like that a lot. That is how you shoot and edit your slow motion video. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. This is what I'm here for, to answer any questions you have. Give this video a like if you liked it. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're new. As always, I will catch you in the next one. Peace out, guys.